Imagine walking into a cafe in Sweden, Norway, or Finland and noticing something unusual. Nobody's trying to fill every second with conversation. There is no constant background noise of people talking loudly, no pressure to entertain strangers, and no awkward panic when a conversation suddenly becomes quiet. For many people, silence feels uncomfortable. But across the Nordic countries, silence can mean something completely different. It can mean comfort, respect, peace, and sometimes simply being present. In much of the world, silence is treated like a problem that needs to be fixed. If two people stop talking, someone quickly reaches for a question, a joke, or their phone. But Nordic cultures often have a different relationship with quietness. A pause doesn't necessarily mean something is wrong. It doesn't mean the other person is bored. And it certainly doesn't mean the friendship is failing. Sometimes silence is simply allowed to exist. This attitude becomes especially interesting when you look at everyday Nordic life. Imagine two friends sitting beside a frozen lake. They might drink coffee, look across the water, and say almost nothing for several minutes. To someone from a highly social culture, that moment might feel strange. To them, it can feel perfectly natural. Why? One reason is that Nordic societies have traditionally placed a high value on personal space and independence. People are generally not expected to constantly perform for one another. You don't always need to prove that you're interesting. You don't need to keep talking just to show that you're friendly. And you don't have to turn every quiet moment into entertainment. There is also something deeper happening. Nordic countries are famous for their relationship with nature. Forests, mountains, snow, lakes, long winter nights. In such environments, quietness isn't necessarily the absence of life. It is part of life. A walk through a forest doesn't need music playing in your ears. A winter evening doesn't always need a crowded room. Sometimes the sound of footsteps in the snow, wind moving through trees, or rain against a window is enough. And this may help explain why silence becomes associated with comfort rather than emptiness. But there's another surprising reason. Silence can also be a form of respect. In Nordic communication, people often value listening carefully instead of immediately responding. They may take a moment to think before speaking. That pause can make conversations feel slower, calmer, and more deliberate. And perhaps that's what makes Nordic silence so fascinating. It isn't simply about talking less. It's about changing the idea of what a meaningful moment is supposed to look like. Because sometimes the most peaceful conversation, and once you understand that, you'll start noticing something even more surprising about Nordic life. Their love of silence may actually reveal how they think about happiness itself. To understand Nordic silence, you have to understand the Nordic relationship with time. In many modern societies, every empty moment is treated as an opportunity to work, to communicate, to scroll, to watch something, to respond, to be productive. But Nordic culture often leaves more room for moments that have no obvious purpose. A quiet coffee, a slow walk, a few minutes looking out of a window, sitting beside a friend without talking. These moments may seem insignificant, but they give the mind permission to slow down. And this becomes especially powerful during the Nordic winter. Where darkness arrives early and temperatures remain low, people have learned to create comfort indoors. Warm lighting, candles, books, coffee, simple meals, soft conversations, and importantly, quiet. Instead of fighting darkness with constant stimulation, many Nordic lifestyles embrace a slower atmosphere. This connects to ideas such as hygge in Denmark and other Nordic traditions of coziness and togetherness. The goal isn't necessarily excitement, it's comfort. And comfort doesn't always need noise. There is also an important principle behind Nordic communication. Don't take more space than necessary. Constantly interrupting or dominating a conversation can be viewed negatively. Listening matters. Giving others room matters. And silence creates that room. Imagine a group of friends sitting around a table. In some cultures, the most talkative person naturally becomes the center of attention. But in Nordic settings, a quieter person isn't expected to fight for attention. They can listen, think, and speak when they actually have something to say. That can make conversations feel less like performances and more like exchanges. But perhaps the biggest secret is this. Nordic people don't necessarily love silence because they dislike people. They may love silence because they don't need constant social stimulation to feel connected. You can sit beside someone without entertaining them. You can spend time alone without feeling lonely. And you can enjoy another person's company without filling every second with words. This becomes especially visible in nature. A Nordic person might go hiking and spend hours surrounded by almost complete quiet. No notifications, no traffic, no conversations, just wind, water, trees, and footsteps. And when they return, they may feel mentally refreshed. The silence wasn't empty. It was restorative. Perhaps that's why Nordic countries fascinate people living in noisier, faster environments. Their lifestyle seems to ask a simple question. What if we don't need to fill every empty space? And that question leads to a deeper part of Nordic culture. Because silence isn't only found in forests or peaceful homes. It also appears in relationships, conflict, and personal boundaries. And once you see that connection, Nordic silence starts looking less like a preference and more like a philosophy. Perhaps the greatest lesson of Nordic silence is not about speaking less. It's about needing less attention, less stimulation, less noise, less pressure to constantly prove yourself. In many places around the world, being socially successful can mean being energetic, expressive, and constantly involved. Nordic culture often leaves more room for another possibility. You can be present without being loud. You can be friendly without being overly familiar. You can care about someone without constantly contacting them. And you can enjoy life without turning every moment into an event. This doesn't mean Nordic people never talk, laugh, celebrate, or enjoy crowded gatherings. Of course they do. The difference is that quietness doesn't automatically need to be escaped. That's a powerful idea in an age of constant notifications. Think about how often your day is interrupted. A message, a video, a phone call, a social media alert, a new piece of information. Even when you're physically alone, your mind may never experience true silence. Nordic traditions offer almost the opposite approach. There is value in stepping away, going outside, taking a walk, drinking coffee slowly, sitting by a window, spending time with people without demanding constant conversation. These simple habits can create something modern life often struggles to provide. Mental space, and perhaps that's why Nordic silence can feel so peaceful. It doesn't ask you to perform. It doesn't ask you to entertain. It doesn't ask you to be productive every second. It simply allows you to exist. There is another important lesson here. Silence can make us better listeners. When we're not preparing our next sentence while someone else is speaking, we actually hear them. We notice their tone, their hesitation, their emotions, their meaning. Sometimes a pause tells us more than a long explanation, and maybe that's the hidden power of Nordic communication. The goal isn't always to say more. Sometimes the goal is to understand more. So the next time you find yourself sitting with someone and the conversation suddenly becomes quiet, don't rush to rescue the moment. Let it breathe. Put the phone away. Look outside. Listen to the environment. And notice what happens when nothing needs to happen. Because silence isn't necessarily emptiness. Sometimes it's where the mind finally catches up with itself. The Nordic countries may have discovered something that modern life is slowly forgetting. Peace doesn't always arrive when the world becomes louder with entertainment. Sometimes peace arrives when the noise finally stops. And perhaps that's the real reason Nordic people love silence. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand that not every meaningful moment needs words. In a world constantly competing for our attention, silence has become something surprisingly rare. And maybe that is exactly why it has become so valuable.